If you're an HR professional who works hard to fill roles within your company, keep employees engaged, and build company culture, welcome to America Back to Work, where dreams only work if we do. We'll share wide-ranging issues surrounding pre-employment background screening, HR topics such as recruiting, hiring, labor trends, and company culture, as well as broader HR-influenced business topics such as customer experience, service level excellence, and protecting what matters through best practices in prevention, protection, and corporate security. America Back to Work is brought to you by S2 Verify. Here's your host, Arnette Heintze.
Welcome to America Back to Work, brought to you by S2 Verify, where our purpose is to help you hire with confidence and manage insider risk. I'm your host, Arnette Heintze. Thank you for joining. Today, our guest is Nancy DiNofrio. Nancy is the Director of National Strategic Accounts at Randstad, which is based in Canada. Nancy, thank you so much for joining me today, and I'm excited to get your perspective on the job market and how things are going for candidates and companies alike. But before we jump into that, would you mind sharing a little bit more about your professional journey? I'd love to hear about your career in HR.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on this show today. I appreciate it. I'm excited to obviously have this conversation. I actually don't come from HR. I don't have an HR background. I was actually in the fashion industry creative space. I was in the retail space for many years, and managing a retail store, I was hiring people, and I just enjoyed it. And for me, it was something I wanted to pursue. So then I moved into the agency space, which was Randstad Canada. And I've been with them for like 10 plus years, on and off. I was a boomerang, came back to them twice. And then that's where my career in terms of recruitment started. And I had the, I call it a luxury of working with some amazing people in HR, some senior TA leaders, some HR directors and leaders. And, I've just became so in love with HR and the beauty of HR and leading and motivating people.
That's wonderful. So let me get your perspective right now on how you feel about the current job market. What's going on out there? What can you share with us from your point of view?
I always like to say we're in a normal job market where we've seen different trends happening and consistently, and it hasn't been stable for a while. I would say right now we are more or less in more of an employer market right now. So I feel like employers are really they're calling the shots in terms of what they're looking for because, the status of the market and the economy isn't stable. So we're in an employer's market to an extent. I think if there's specific sort of niche roles or very particular roles that they would be sourcing from the same talent pool as their competitors, then I feel like that becomes more of a candidate's market. So it's quite interesting.
Yep. So for HR managers who are out there scouring for the best talent, what are the issues that are keeping them busy or keeping them concerned about the current market?
For sure. I think what happened is hiring managers are, I feel, in my opinion, and I've seen it happen to a high extent, is they are so scared to make a decision on a hire. I think when we saw Great Resignation happening, people were moving, they got a little bit scared and they were making fast hires. They weren't necessarily the right hires. And I feel like because they've made some bad hires in the past, they're a little scared to make a hire moving forward. So they're taking their time, they're really thinking about it because it's a quality of hire that they want to be sure that they're hiring the right fit, the right add to their team. So they're a little bit worried, right? If they make a bad hire, feel like they've been stung in the past before. So they're being a bit more reserved in terms of their selection and their hiring.
That's interesting. So let's flip the coin and go to the candidate side. What are the issues that are on their minds today?
It's less a monetary drive for them in terms of pursuing a next opportunity. I've seen candidates in the market that come to me and said, Nancy, I'm okay with taking a 15-20% pay cut, but I need succession. I need growth. I need a clear path of where I'm going next in my career, and also to leadership, right? Leadership is key because we all know, like, if you are being led by a leader that you don't have a connection with, or you feel motivated by, it actually affects your performance in your career. It affects your personal life. So people are being more mindful of, A, like, is this going to be the right leader for me? B, am I going to have growth? Are they going to invest in my growth? Where will I be in 2 years? So those are really more concerning for them as opposed to just the monetary aspect. So they're being much more, I would say, asking a lot of hard questions in an interview, right? So they're doing the interviewing as well.
Oh, great. So, we had a recent guest that talked about how some employers are ghosting their candidates once the interview process starts. And, that hurts both sides of the equation. But what are some other ways candidates might become disillusioned with the interviewing process?
If the expectations are clear to them from the very beginning, and I feel like this is where the process fails and where it could leave a bad taste in a candidate's mouth. They just don't know. They're assuming the process is going to be maybe 2 to 3 meetings, but then it ends up being 5 to 6 meetings. And then they also throw in a case study, right, in there as well. So that could leave a bad taste in a candidate's mouth because if they're, they don't have the right expectation of how that interview flow is going to go, especially the candidates working as well, right? So they need to know how much time they're going to invest in this process. So, I feel like with no clear expectations in terms of timelines, and then just throwing stuff at them unexpectedly, I think that is a red flag for candidates. Yeah.
So what about other red flags candidates might find during that process, especially as it relates to the red flags that might hurt the reputation or brand of a company?
Yeah. And I'm going to be honest here. I've had situations where the interview process has been 2 to 3 or 4 steps where they have individuals meet with other key people within their teams, which makes sense because you obviously want to ensure that the person's going to connect well with your existing team. However, we've had situations where a person, maybe is not the happiest and they are hosting the interview with a potential candidate. So they could say negative things or they can ask inappropriate questions. And that has left a bad taste in candidates' mouth. So it's really like making sure that you are having that process that's going to flow nicely and that you're having key people meet with the right talent, right? So, controlling the process is key here as well. But that could leave a bad taste in a candidate's mouth, the experience that they have with other people on their team. So, it could be a lot of things, but also too, what are your red flags? Red flags could be different for everybody, right? So you need to understand what questions are you going to ask to learn what those, if there are visible red flags.
Yeah. During the interview process, I know some HR leaders get surprised that when they find out that maybe there's a cultural problem with their organization. I want to know how the HR leaders can deal with these cultural problems that all of a sudden pops up. How do you think they are confronting these? Or have you heard, maybe you haven't heard of any issues like that?
No, I've heard because listen, we all know, like if you're keeping a leader that is, not the best leader in terms of motivating their staff, or maybe it becomes more of a do this, do that, as opposed to leading and motivating. The worst thing an organization can do is to, keep that leader in that role, right? If it doesn't connect to what their overall EVP is, right? So I think HR needs to be well connected to all of the leaders within their business crew and have those open and transparent conversations with their teams, with the leaders, understand what is the dynamic, what's happening, and then obviously look at like the succession growth from a leader, right? Because a good leader is going to obviously grow in succession people within the organization. So I think it comes to HR having visibility with those client groups that they're overseeing. And if there are any sort of cultural issues, they really need to address them sooner than later. Because at the end of the day, Arnette, if they don't address them sooner or later, that's when an organization loses amazing people because they don't have the right leader in place.
Yep. So one of the things that, this world of technology that we've all come across, and especially with AI coming into the, I think job seekers are starting to really put a lot of effort into researching the company and the prospective employers. Are you hearing issues around this? I mean, do you find more job seekers coming to interviews well armed about the issues of leadership?
Absolutely. And that's something that I would coach my candidates on, right? So we we still do obviously thorough candidate preps when they would meet our clients. And one of the things that we would say is do your research, right? And the beauty of like social media and all of these great tools like LinkedIn, you can do thorough research and understand. If you go into a LinkedIn Insights, you can see, the turnover within an organization. You can see how long what is the median tenure that people are staying within this organization. You can look up the leader. You can look up their about. What are they motivated by? How long have they been at the organization? And then you can look at people that have been reporting into them. How long have they stayed there? Have they moved? So, there's a lot of research that you can do to understand and do your prep work. Is this going to be the leader that I'm going to want to work under? What questions, if I have any questions about their leadership, what do those questions look like? So you can formulate those questions based on all of that intel. You could pull a lot, Arnette, you could pull a lot from someone's LinkedIn profile,
Yep.
a lot of information. So candidates need to do that, because if they don't, I think they're hurting themselves in the end, because they're not going to ask the powerful questions to determine whether that organization is the right fit for them. Most importantly, whether that leader is the right fit for them.
So true. So on the employer side, HR teams are not always the final decision on hiring, but there's oftentimes a hiring manager. But how are HR teams working with the hiring manager today to answer questions around leadership and culture?
I think it's a combined effort, to be fair. I feel like it's HR, and also talent acquisition. I mean, if you're putting TA under HR, normally an organization would, then, it's really important that they are having open conversations. And it's important for HR and TA to coach hiring managers to make sure that they're having the right conversations with candidates and to educate them as well, and really to be more of that advisory mode with the hiring managers, because, the onus is on both the hiring manager and HR TA to ensure that the right talent is coming within the organization.
So let's suppose we've got a company and it's got some information out there on the web about a bad culture. How do you what's the best advice you have for whether it's the hiring manager or a member of the HR team? How do they best deal with that? With the information, if they know it's out there? Is that something they should bring up ahead of time, or should they wait until the candidate brings the topic up?
No, I think if they want to be proactive, and if it is an issue that is pressing for them and they're working actively to repair their employer brand in the market, and they know that they have a lot of work ahead of them, they need to be honest and transparent, because candidates are super savvy. We live in a well-connected world. They're going to come to the conversation knowing this, and they're probably going to ask whether it's the recruiter or whether it's the hiring manager. And they should ask, rightfully so, if it's a pressing issue. They need to be concerned of their future, right? And so if I were in the employer side of things, I would say, hi, you've probably I'm sure that you've done your research. This has come to your attention. Here's what we're doing. We know that it's a challenge, but here's what we're doing to repair it, and going over the action plan. Because that is going to, when you're open and honest about the challenges that you're facing, it's a candidate's going to appreciate that more, as opposed to you band-aiding the solution like it doesn't even exist, right? Because if a candidate is willing to be part of that action and say, hey, you know what? I'm not scared of this, because I'm willing to be a part of that project and to work towards improving the employer brand, that's going to be a beautiful conversation. So it's better to be open and transparent.
So true. So, we started our conversation around the job market. So
yes.
You had a crystal ball and you're looking out ahead. What do you see happening over the next year or so in the job market? Do you see it?
Yeah.
There's a lot of discussion about whether or not we're going to have a recession here in the United States, and what's that do for, companies that maybe have need to downsize. But what do you see happening?
Listen, I don't know when things are going to improve, but let me tell you, when they do, and it could be in the latter part of 2024, when they do, we're going to have a Great Resignation Act too. Yeah, I'm confident. Yeah, in that, because I'm going to tell you this, Arnette. People aren't, when I'm talking to a lot of organizations, they're sitting on inflated retention rates, Okay. And it's not necessarily, that's great. They're probably doing a lot of great things, but to have like very little turnover is quite rare, right? And they're seeing, record retention rates. It's because people are scared to move right now. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're entirely happy, right? We see a lot of organizations, especially in Canada, with aggressive RTO. People are not necessarily happy about that, but they're staying because it's stable and they don't want to take a risk moving into a new company. So I feel that as soon as the market starts to get better, we are going to see a ton of movement, record movement, just like we saw, previous years, right? In that 2021 where everybody was moving. I'm most definitely, I think we're going to see that happen.
Oh, very insightful. So we're coming towards the end of our time together, Nancy, but before we sign off, I have a question for you that I'd like to ask, that I ask every guest. If S2 Verify were to conduct a background investigation of you, would there be any surprises?
No surprises. It would be very clean. No surprises. I am such an open and transparent person, so I'm very honest. So no surprises there. Be very, very clean.
That's wonderful. So Nancy, I really appreciate your time today. How can our listeners connect with you and learn more about what you're up to and follow your work?
Follow me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I do about 2 to 3 posts per week. I post a lot of actionable content and just from insightful, proactive tidbits of information to where I feel like the future of work is going, because it's exciting and scary at the same time. So follow me if you want some insights about the future of work and some great actionable content about HR and particularly talent acquisition. And send me any sort of message, happy to connect with all of you.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much. And before we go, I also would like to have a minute with Bill and Jim, my partners at S2 Verify. We were talking earlier, Bill, and I know you had some thoughts about reportability. Can you provide some insight into that?
If you're talking about reportability from the standpoint of the states, so under FCRA, basically a criminal conviction is reportable forever. Under certain states, it's only reportable up to 7 years. California is a big one, and so if you have a criminal conviction beyond 7 years in California, you can't report it. There's also, regulations around arrest records. So not only is there an FCRA governing body for criminal convictions and criminal records, there's individual states that only allow you to report records within a 7-year window.
I think that's hugely important for our clients and anybody that's looking at background screening. There's many employers that sometimes think they just get everything from an individual's background from the time they were born to the time they are working, but in reality, that is that time frame, 7 years, is probably more the standard. I know there are some states that we can go 10 years, but it's not forever. And when it comes to light, sometimes somebody finds out, oh, well, so-and-so had a conviction for theft that maybe went back 20 years. They start asking, why didn't we have that information? Well, in fact, CRAs are not permitted providing that information, nor are they allowed to use that information in their hiring decisions.
Yeah, I mean, we have a very specific client that oftentimes, the local location's calling us saying you missed a record. Well, no, we found the record. We just adjudicated it out of the reporting of that record so that the person didn't, you can't see it. So we didn't miss a record, but like you say, according to the client and or the state, we can't report that record. So,
yeah. Hey, Jim, and Bill just referenced this adjudication, and I know that's a process, and we have a number of team members that are dedicated to full-time adjudication that work with you in this area. Why don't you provide our clients and audience a little bit of insight around this process?
Glad to do so. This is something that Bill and I took on day one. Many CRAs in this industry kind of do what's deemed to be automated or robotic or electronic adjudication. It's a very complex topic, particularly to try to talk about in a short window here. But having said that, what our clients would need to know from S2Verify is every record that's going to be sent through to a client has eyes on by a human. Electronically, no records found or clear records. Yes, the robot cuts them loose. But if there's a record to be reviewed, a human lays eyes on that. Specifically because the very things that Billy just touched on. What are the client's criteria? What state does the applicant reside in? Key point. California is a 7-year state. But if the applicant's living in Texas and has a record that's 9 years old in California, the California law doesn't apply to it. It applies to the residence or where that candidate actually lives. Point to your question, Arnette, our folks look at those records. They look at client criteria. They look at where the record came from. They look at the details of the record to fundamentally ascertain, can I send this? Does it meet requirements of the state and the client, or do I need to pull it? Is it a conviction? Is it an arrest record? Is it a deferred adjudication? Is he still in the window, he or she? All of those variables go into that. And we've got a large group of people that this is what they do every day. Primarily law enforcement background, criminal justice background, clerk of court backgrounds where they're familiar with records, court process, how records are prosecuted, what language in certain counties, states means. But for us to verify and for our clients, it's a huge win because we don't send these things out without looking at them. Last but not least, it requires, if you will, people to ultimately ascertain whether or not the source of the record is even clear enough to send. So our folks engage with courts and states. They'll get a record back, be it from a robot or from a court runner. They'll look at it and go, well, that makes no sense, right? So others in our industry send it. Ours gets stopped, researched, clarified. Then it's either pushed forward or called back. But it's a very, very, probably one of the most critical resource groups we have at S2Verify.
For our audience, please tune in next week when we continue our exploration of topics critical to success in HR. We'll see you then. And it goes without saying, let's get America and Canada back to work because dreams only work if we do. Nancy, thank you so much for joining. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you for having me.
If you want to stay abreast of HR, recruiting, and hiring trends, tips, and tools, make sure you subscribe to America Back to Work. If you enjoyed this episode, leave us a rating and a review.